this hasn't stopped a very strategic Emmanuel Macron spotting a weak spot in Brexit Britain, potentially using a Starmer government to reassert Britain's position within the EU. Now, this will, of course, upset, more than upset, infuriate, I'm assuming, Brexiteers, who are already viewing Sir Keir as Macron's poodle, effectively.
All eyes on France. Macron has been a busy boy. He hosted Keir Starmer, a very interesting visit for the leader of the opposition to head there. And then he hosted a big state visit for the King and Queen. It was very much heralded as a success. King Charles became the first king to address the French Senate and attended a lavish state banquet attended by Mick Jagger, Hugh Grant and the former Arsenal manager Arsene Wenger. But what is the state of Macron's France? Because remember, this visit by the royal family had to be postponed because earlier in the year there were terrible riots and protests in France. A lot of anger, a lot of very raw anger facing Macron domestically and internationally. And a lot of people as well looking at his influence in sub-Saharan Africa, which was always an important relationship for the French president to have. So what is the state of Macron's France? Well, joining me now, I'm delighted to have a brilliant journalist in the studio. Nabilla Ramdani is a journalist. She's also an author. She's just written a really fascinating book as well called Fixing France, How to Repair a Broken Republic. Nabilla, welcome.
Thank you for having me, Aisha.
So let's start off with some of the British politics in France. Busy time for Paris. What did you make about the visit by Starmer to Macron, to see Macron? What do you think's going on there?
Well, it certainly was an extremely busy week in France, to the extent that it was hard to keep up with who was coming and who was going. And I've just been back, and I know that this weekend is a huge one too, because the Pope arrived in Marseille and there are massive rugby fixtures as well. But Keir Starmer was clearly a huge story, despite everything else that was going on. Remember, this was an unofficial visit because he's the leader of the opposition, and it's actually highly unusual for opposition politicians to get a one-on-one meeting with the president of France. And I think that Brexit was absolutely at the top of the agenda, especially as France and Germany this week floated a blueprint for the expansion of the EU project. So a hugely significant part of this was getting Ukraine into the EU. But there was also lots of references to Britain. And the idea is that Britain can be some kind of associate member, which is, of course, whistle words for getting the UK back into the fold, slowly integrating into the project, a project that was rejected in 2016. So remember also, this was a time when 2016, when Emmanuel Macron was calling Brexit a crime and when Starmer was actively campaigning against Brexit. So there's clearly a meeting of minds there, even though, for political purposes, Keir Starmer has come out in favour of Brexit.
And the Labour Party press office very quickly came out and said, after this idea was floated about this associate membership, they came out and said, no, we're not going to do this associate membership. They sort of shut it down quite quickly.
Well, I think because Keir Starmer knows that he cannot win a general election by pledging to reverse Brexit. But this hasn't stopped a very strategic Emmanuel Macron spotting a weak spot in Brexit Britain, potentially using a Starmer government to reassert Britain's position within the EU. Now, this will, of course, upset, more than upset, infuriate, I'm assuming, Brexiteers, who are already viewing Sir Keir as Macron's poodle, effectively. As you said, the Labour Party already put a statement out saying that Keir has no intention to getting Britain back into the single market. But I am saying watch this space, because if a Labour government does come to power next year, Macron, who is in some way viewed as the de facto leader of the EU, will be gleefully waiting.
And just knowing Macron, you're a great student of President Macron. You follow France very, very closely, obviously. Do you think he and Keir Starmer will get on a sort of philosophical level, on a human level, on an ideological level?
I think so. I think, Macron, if let's be honest, he was elected president of France purely by chance at a moment when the Socialist Party was completely disintegrating following President Hollande's disastrous one term in office. The conservative Gaullist Party was exploding with all sorts of allegations of sleaze against Nicolas Sarkozy, against Fillon, who has been criminalized since. And if it wasn't for that bit of luck, if you like, Macron being elected president, he would have ended up as a technocrat in the EU. He very much fancies, EU politics. And I think Keir Starmer also views fundamentally Britain's place within the EU project and within the European Union as a whole. And I think ideologically they do get on. They are very much aligned politically. And that's why that visit was
symbolic.
Yes.
And before we get onto your book, let's quickly talk about the state visit. It was seen as a real success story. Why was it so important for both parties to make that visit and make that visit happen?
Well, I think from an establishment point of view, Macron was very keen to have the royals, not least of all because he's a massive fan of the royal family. He had very touching words for the late Queen when she passed, as we all remember. But I think strategically, it was an important visit for him, in the sense that he's an archetypal French president who believes in the majesty of France. And this was a chance to show it off alongside the majesty of the United Kingdom. And in this sense, it absolutely worked. And let's not forget that there's a huge interest in France in the British royal family. The French media gave wall-to-wall coverage to the visit. They were on the front pages of newspapers, magazines, on live television channels. And there's a huge respect for the British royals, despite the fact that the French beheaded their own monarchs. So perhaps there's some guilt trip going on, but there's certainly a lot of affection for the British royals. I follow them around. I followed the King and the Queen around, and lots of people were chanting, long live the King, long live the Queen at any opportunity. I even managed to shake His Majesty's hand.
Wow.
When I said to him, welcome to my home city.
Grip? Was it a good firm grip, would you say?
It was very, very proper. I said to him, welcome to my home city, Your Majesty. And he replied, merci, merci. I was very touched by that. And a lot of French people were certainly moved by the visit.
And the timing, of course, of the visit, very symbolic and important as well. We have just marked the anniversary of the passing of the late Queen, which was a very huge moment. And this is the first big international trip that King Charles has done. So the fact that France was chosen is important. And as you says, it does show that there is this kind of close relationship, even though politically things have been, let's say, a bit chilly over the last few years. It's interesting, isn't it, that we're obviously seeing a bit of, to be fair, Rishi Sunak has got things on a better track following Liz Truss and Boris Johnson, but it feels like there's a kind of thawing in relations. Rishi Sunak making advances, Keir Starmer obviously getting a very warm welcome, and the royal family.